It's time to talk about specialists in Battlefield 2042. This is a system that I was willing to give the benefit of the doubt and willing to see how this system would develop and try it out, generally speaking, in the beta before coming to any conclusions. And I think after trying the beta, I can safely say now that specialists don't really work in Battlefield 2042, and there are a couple of key reasons for why that's the case. In this video, I'm going to go over all the issues with specialists in 2042, and I'm also going to offer solutions as well, because specialists could very easily still be a part of 2042, but in a way that makes much more sense than it currently does. There are lots of key issues with specialists, but there are four main ones that I really have picked out. The first one is a difficulty to see who is an enemy and who is a friendly without being heavily reliant on the HUD. There have been times where even where the HUD is active, my muscle memory is just used to seeing a different color of uniform and expecting to see something different in order to identify a target. I would expect Russian uniforms to be some kind of grey or green, and this is something that's becoming an inherent issue and something that I'm noticing time and time again. And the major issue here is that simply having specialists who all look the same across both sets of teams makes it inherently difficult to tell whether or not I should be shooting at somebody, because no matter how good the HUD is, it might not always kick in properly, and generally speaking, people have a sort of visual muscle memory that they're looking for. That doesn't exist here. That's a major issue in my opinion, and although there is issues with having different uniform types between the US and Russia, they don't necessarily have to be dark and light uniforms. You know, Russia doesn't have to have a dark green uniform. It can have a bright-ish green uniform, or a medium green uniform, or maybe the Americans can be tan and the Russians could be an ash gray. Whatever it so happens to be, having different sets of uniforms doesn't have to affect visibility. The next issue I'm finding very prevalent in the game is an inability to identify players who have useful equipment in the game. I don't know who has an ammo box, I don't know who has a medic box, I have no idea who can heal me, and as much as there is reliance on your squad mates there, and that can very easily be solved between working with your squad, I do still believe that a team effort to some degree is still necessary. There have been lots of times in previous Battlefield games where I've been saved by a team player with an ammo box or with a medic bag, and that's something that I would like to see return, because it's becoming inherently difficult to see who has what. The next major issue for me is that it does not incentivize team play at all. Specialists are pretty much how quickly can I make this specialist a one-man army or as useful as humanly possible, and because of that it means that you don't really feel a reliance to work with teammates, and you don't really feel a reliance to work with squad mates. Now, whilst 2042 definitely rewards you for working as a squad, and one good squad can be very effective in the game if they work together, generally speaking, it doesn't incentivize team play at all. Because why would I take something that would benefit my teammates if I can take something that can benefit myself? And the last issue is an issue that inadvertently I think they were trying to avoid in previous Battlefields by introducing this system, but are going to end up with again. And that's the fact that people are inevitably going to pick one or more specialists more than any other, because they're far more useful. This entire 2042 beta has pretty much been Webster McKay versus Webster McKay, for example. And whilst Battlefields of the past have been plagued by having, you know, everybody pick Engineer or Assault because of the weapons they have, you could very easily still have class systems that had multiple weapons. You know, you didn't necessarily need to restrict the classes in terms of weaponry, you could have just restricted them in terms of equipment, and I think that would have evened out the pick rating across the board. Fundamentally, the issue with specialists is that they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Now, they either offer abilities that are useful and powerful to the extent where they negatively impact gameplay, or they make the abilities so useless that they simply may not exist at all. There's no need for them if they are just these gimmick abilities that happen to exist on the side. There are a couple of good examples of this. Take for example Maria Thalk. There are a couple examples of this already, and I think the obvious one is Boris's drone. His drone seemingly is more or less completely useless. I don't really see it being effective in most scenarios. It dies in like 2 shots. It maybe will get a single shot on you in some situations, but you know, it's not going to lock down entire areas, so what's the point, right? You may as well just make Boris the support player who always has ammunition. Casper, for example, you know, he has a drone which is quite good against vehicles if you EMP it, but at the same time, it's also a very weak drone. So again, What's the point? He may as well just be a recon. On the flip side of that, you've got Falk. Now, people haven't realized this, and I do believe that this might be a bug, but Falk at the moment can shoot the ground with her pistol and heal herself instantly, which is very powerful. And if you combine that with an armor plate, that's even more powerful, because you then can heal yourself and plate yourself very quickly and tank a lot more bullets than the average player, which negatively impacts gameplay in a lot of ways. And there are lots more rumored operators. We know one, for example, has a ballistic shield and the ability to put down an APS, and that seems very, very useful. But I can think of lots of objective points, lots of capture points, and lots of locations where something like being able to put down a ballistic shield and stop any grenades hitting you could be pretty overpowered in some scenarios. And there are rumors of an operator who can allegedly track players, and if that's the case, then they're an instant #1 pick across the board. So in this sense of the word, the specialist system is either doomed by being too good or doomed by being entirely useless. If it's too good, then it's negatively impacting gameplay and it's making things very difficult to enjoy the experience on the ground. But if it's too bad, then what's the point? You know, I may as well be able to have an easy identification of who is friendly or enemy, an easy identification of who has useful equipment, and incentivize more team play. It's just a simple basic thing in that sense. I think the solution for me personally is very obvious. Now, for those of you who are unaware, because of Battlefield Portal, all of the files for Battlefield 3 style soldiers are in the game, and they look like traditional role loadouts that you've seen before for both American and Russian troops. So I think, temporarily speaking, I would go back to that class system, but just allow every single class to take a weapon that they want. I don't necessarily think it's game-breaking for a sniper to use a DMR or an assault rifle, because I do feel as though if you're using a sniper role, fundamentally you're looking to create distance anyway, so you'll probably end up using super long-range variants. It's really easy if you think about it, because they can actually still make specialists a part of the cosmetic system, a part of the monetization system, and a part of the game, but make them interchangeable. So have your traditional assault engineer, have your traditional support and recon, or even mix it up a little bit. You know, have a medic, have a support player, have a recon player, and then have an engineer. I mean, whatever composition of previous Battlefield classes you want to put together, have those systems in place, but make them look very obvious as to what they are, and have them have equipment that is useful. Every single medic / assault in the game should have the ability to revive somebody quickly from either 20 health to 100 health, and it shouldn't be this long-winded animation. I would much rather having defib paddles or a syringe or something of that variety. That should 100% always be the case. You should never be able to sacrifice your ability to revive somebody, and they've seemingly done that already to some degree with Falk, so an easy change. Secondly, every single support player should always have ammunition, and that's something you should be able to walk up to that player, press a button, and take ammo from them. Every single engineer should always have a repair tool, and for recons, honestly, I don't think recons have a staple piece of equipment. Maybe give them a recon drone, give them something useful, give them something that makes them an interesting asset rather than something like a spawn beacon, which can be quite game-breaking. And effectively emplace the default uniforms from Battlefield 3 onto 2042. And then, if you want to be smart about it, offer the ability to interchange between specialists and individual characters. Everybody gets the default character, the default assault, the default support, the default medic, the default whatever it so happens to be. But, for example, if you want to be a Boris support player, you can switch to the Boris skin, or you can switch to the Falk skin for a medic, or you can switch to the Webster McKay skin for assault. These are all options, and these are all cosmetic options that people definitely still would do, because there'd be skins available for them that make them look even cooler in battle. The only complication to this method is that there would have to be 2 skins for every faction. So if you have, for example, a Webster McKay, he has to look one way in the American faction and one way in the Russian faction. And then if you're going to continue to offer DLC skins for those factions, they have to be either faction specific or have an alternate for their US or Russian counterpart. I know that sounds a little complex, but that's simply the way things have to work. Cosmetics, specialists, and a good class support system can exist in this game and can generate revenue still because people are interested in cosmetics and skins, but they have to be done a correct way. And for example, even if you made every single assault player, every single medic player, every single support and engineer player take a specific piece of equipment all the time, that doesn't mean you couldn't have a second equipment slot. every engineer can equip an explosive device, so they could pick, for example, the recoilless, or they could decide to take something else. And you could take those specialist abilities and put them into that equipment slot. For example, assault players may have the option to take Webster McKay's grappling gun. Or, for example, support players may have the option to take the ballistic shield. Or recon players could take the EMP drone. Whatever it so happens to be, so long as it's interchangeable with another critical piece of equipment, and it also doesn't take away the default equipment of that class. So you could have, for example, a repair tool and a rocket launcher, or a repair tool and C5, or you could have an ammo pack and you could have the ballistic shield, or an ammo pack and the active protection system. Whatever it so happens to be, so long as you know for a fact that a specific class has specific equipment that's beneficial to your gameplay and to your team play. I think this is a really good way of doing things. I think scrapping the specialist system, taking a few extra months to redesign them cosmetically at launch of the game would be a better idea than the current specialist system in the game. Replace all of 2042's current class and equipment system with the assets that are currently in Battlefield Portal, the Battlefield 3 soldiers, get them in there, make them the US and Russian factions, and allow the ability to have the specialist equipment a second equipable slot within those specific classes. And that way you can have really good equipment, really good fun with those things. You can still have specialists in the future, but you don't have super OP compositions. You can identify your players, you can identify useful equipment, you can have better team play, and you won't have everybody picking one or two specialists. And I honestly think the issue of selecting specific classes over others would be drastically reduced if there was no restriction on the primary weapon that you could take, and rather it was just a restriction on the equipment that you could take. You know, people will stop taking engineer roles if they don't think that the recoilless suits them, but that the support's ballistic shield does suit them. And even if in the end people still favour certain classes, at least you get much more elements of team play versus a one-man army specialist system that currently exists in the game. And this would be a much more balanced system as well. I don't like the fact, for example, that Falk can take an armor plate and syringe herself very quickly. There are rumours of a specialist who can call in ammunition and health drops. If he can take a rocket launcher, for example, he would have pretty much infinite levels of rockets, and that's a really stupid system as well. And we have quality of life things in the past that cancel stuff out. So even if, for example, the support player had ammunition as default but could take C5, we know from previous battlefields that we can reduce the regen on C5 to make sure he isn't too OP or has too much explosive power per life. Simple things, stuff that's happened in previous Battlefield, and a system that needs to come back in 2042. At the minute, I think specialists don't really work in the game, but they can still be an option. Every single season, if you're introducing 4 specialists a season, introduce a specialist for the medic class and give them a skin for Russia and a skin for America, and then introduce a new piece of equipment with that specialist. Now, this is just a crappy theoretical idea off the top of my head, but let's say, for example, in a future expansion you introduced a new British specialist who had a shoulder-mounted grenade launcher that fired smoke rounds, but that was limited to a support role option, so that every single support player had the ability to disperse a quick layer of smoke to support their teammates. Again, there are lots of balancing issues with that, it's just a crappy idea off the top of my head, but it's still a great way that you can introduce a cool new specialist with cool new cosmetics that work for both factions, and whose equipment can be beneficial to the existing class system in the game, because that specialist would automatically still have ammo, but have a cool new ability that could be useful for your team. Overarchingly, I think the system I've decided to devise up here, from what I've understood about 2042, is better for the game. I think there's more team play, I think you can easily identify players, I think the pick rate will be in a similar vein to what you would expect with a specialist system anyway, and ultimately you're not harming the metagame. I haven't been revived all that much whilst playing 2042. Very few people have given me ammo, very few people have healed me, and people are playing this game as a solo one-man army, and I think that's going to continue to be the case because the specialist system incentivizes that kind of gameplay. So folks, that's about it from me today, TheTacticalBrit. Leave a like, leave a comment, and let me know what your thoughts and feelings are for 2042. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next one.